a seat, tiny people? Here we go. We're going to do a few notes because that's what we love to do. Rebellion versus revolution, what we were talking about yesterday. I have no idea how far we went. Did we finish this?
Here we are.
Okay. All right. Congress decided, what are we going to do? I mean, think about it. They had all these farmers, these Minutemen who had come at a moment's notice. All they really grabbed was a little bit of weaponry, a little bit of ammunition, jumped off, shot the British up as they retreated from Concord. But now what do? Go back home, finish dinner, just forget it never happened? Do they stay there and fight against the British? Is this going to now move to a war kind of a situation? Well, Congress finally decided, I guess it is. I mean, we're already shooting at each other. We better turn these people into an army. And so Congress authorized an army, and they said, now, who do we get to command this? And they looked around. They chose George Washington for two reasons. First of all, they knew Mr. Holman had a really cool pair of George Washington socks. That was important. Okay, so they had two reasons. The first one was that he had command experience. Do you remember when, in the French and Indian War, General Braddock had been killed going out to Fort Duquesne, and George Washington had taken command of part of the regular British Army and retreated back into Virginia. And before that, he had gone to Fort Duquesne with the Virginia militia, and again, he had been attacked. He built Fort Necessity, and he had retreated and brought his army back to fight again. So George Washington was one of the few colonists who had experience leading a large number of soldiers in battle. That was huge. I mean, think about it. If you know how to fight, okay, you're a rough and tumble guy like, I don't know, Claire. And, clearly she gets into fights on a regular basis. So she can defend herself. She knows how to fight. Does that mean she knows how to lead an army? No, it's a whole different set of skills. So George Washington had shown that he knew how to do this. So George Washington, first reason, he had experience. Second reason, he was from the South. I'm going to go over up near this map. Everybody look over here for a minute. Most of what's been going on has been up around Boston. Now, it's true they did go over and raid into upper New York, Ethan Allen and the boys, but it's all up here in the north. There was still some sympathy when they closed Boston Harbor. Lots of these colonies sent some help to Boston overland. But the American patriots wanted to make sure that they got all the colonies involved. So they needed somebody from the South in a major position. And they decided that would be good to take George Washington, who was from Virginia, and make him the commander. So the second reason Washington was chosen was he was a Southerner. Now let's see if we can get this straight. It's kind of a tricky thing. If you use south as a direction, he's going south. That's a lowercase s. But if you talk about going to the South, that would be an uppercase S. So if you talk about a Southerner, that would be someone from the South. That would be a capital S. It's the same thing with what we are. We are Midwesterners from the Midwest. So that would be capitalized. Yeah, buddy? They chose him from the South because this is where the fighting was. These guys have already had a battle. They're already involved. These guys, being close by, were very sympathetic and had already sent some aid up here. They didn't want to cut off and say, okay, it's just these colonies. They wanted the whole thing breaking off together. All righty. Yeah, they wanted all the colonies to resist the British. Alrighty. So Washington takes command. He's the guy that's going to be in charge. He comes over to Boston to see what's happening, what the situation is. I mean, he was not there. He was down in Virginia. He wasn't aware particularly of what Boston and the layout looked like and what he had. He took command July 3rd, 1775, so about a year before we ever declared independence. And George Washington was blessed in that very quickly the cannon arrived from Fort Ticonderoga. Remember, Ethan Allen and the boys had gone up to Lake Champlain. They had taken over Fort Ticonderoga and Crown Point, and over the mountains through the winter, they had brought down the cannon from the fort, and they arrived in the summer of 1775. So here it comes. He's got some cannon, and he puts it up on a hill called Dorchester Heights, actually a big raised area called Dorchester Heights, outside the city of Boston. And this is huge. This is enormous. All right. Let's see. Yes, sir. Absolutely. Just grab one and keep it, buddy. Thank you. All right. Must be time for a physics lesson. Okay. Tabby, you look like a volunteer. Let's see, who else? Cha-cha, you look like a volunteer. Okay, you guys come up here, you two. That sounds like a really wonderful idea, but no, I wasn't. Cha-cha, you're standing right here. Tabby, you're standing over there. All right, listen to me carefully, please. I am going to take this rubber band. I am going to put it on this ruler and create rubber band on ruler. I've got myself a cannon. Okay. Oh, I'm going to get down on the ground. Might take 6 of you to get me back up, but I'm going to get down on the ground. Go about this stump. I'm going to pull this thing back to 14. All right. Daniel, I want you to watch this, and I want you to put your foot down where it first touches the carpet. Okay? Not where it eventually bounces to, where it first touches the carpet. Ready? All right, here we go. A little bit further, I think. Okay. All right, back yourself up so you can still mark that. Thank you. All right, Tandy. Same thing. You ready? Okay. What stops most cannonballs?
Air.
Air? No. What stops most cannonballs? Right. Hitting the ground. Okay. A cannon is just a big tube. No, leave your foot mark like that. A cannon is just a big tube. There's an explosion at one end, and a cannonball rides down inside that big tube, and as soon as it leaves the tube, gravity starts working on it, and it begins to fall. It's almost imperceptible at the start because it's coming out so quickly. But notice when I was down near the ground, I pulled the rubber band back a certain distance, and it went as far as Cha-Cha's foot. When I got up on the hill, when I got up higher, I shot the rubber band with the same amount of force, and it went all the way over to here. Now, the lesson is George Washington put his cannon up on a hill overlooking Boston. He could shoot everything and anyone in the city of Boston. He could shoot the British warships in the harbor. He could hit anywhere where they're camped in the common. Any place they had ammunition stored, he could hit it. Not only would they have to shoot from the ground, but since he was up on a hill, they'd have to shoot up. And that means the force of having to propel the cannonball up would make it even go a shorter distance. You guys can sit down now, thanks. So what that means is Washington on the hill can shoot the British anywhere in Boston. He can shoot the ships in the harbor, and they can't shoot him back. They can't hit him. Yes. What was what, honey? Dorchester Heights. Right here. So it's fortified Dorchester Heights. That means he put his weapons up there. Yeah, honey. W.M. William. Where do you see W.M.? Oh, yeah. All righty. So Washington has outmaneuvered the British. They have no choice but to abandon the city of Boston. They have to leave. General Gage, the guy who's been in charge of all the British forces in North America, is fired. He's replaced by General Sir William Howe. Now, soldiers occasionally get nicknames. George Patton was old blood and guts. Zachary Taylor was old rough and ready. And General Gage was known as Grandma Gage. Not really a great nickname for a soldier. They thought he was too timid. He wasn't hanging anybody. He wasn't arresting anybody. The British didn't think he was doing much. So he's replaced by General Howe. General Howe's orders are, hey, put this thing down. Let's get rid of this rebellion. But he's still outmaneuvered by George Washington, so General Howe has to abandon the city of Boston March 17, 1776. He just has to leave. There's no other choice. He can't stay. He'd just be a target for Washington's cannon. When he leaves, 1,000 loyalists beg to go with him. A loyalist, here comes the definition. A loyalist is a colonist who sided with the British. He wanted to remain, or she wanted to remain, a British subject. Don't want any rebellion, we'll pay our taxes, don't want any revolution, we don't want to be a separate country. We just like things the way they are. We're all for the British. A colonist who is on the British side. They went up to Canada. Stayed there for a little bit because there was no trouble up in Canada. Right? Okay. I always like to tell the story back in 1976, 200 years later, when there was the bicentennial, the 200th anniversary of the United States. President then was Jimmy Carter, and he received a telegram from the descendants of the Loyalists that said, enough of this nonsense, come back to the crown. Like, yes, come on, become colonies again. And we didn't take him up on it. All right. So again, let's think about what's going on here. You have these troops, these British troops. They've been reinforced. There are big naval warships in the harbor. This is a strong presence, and they're just outmaneuvered. They lost at Concord. Arguably, they lost at Bunker Hill, and now they have to abandon the whole city of Boston. The British are angry, not happy. That's the rubber band and the cannons. Yes. No. But thanks for asking. It's all on Google Classroom, buddy. You get ready ahead of time. Okay. Fighting breaks out elsewhere. The British said, okay, what have we got? Again, I told you, anyone can win a fight if they stop and think about what are my advantages. And the British said, okay, what are our advantages? Oh, I know. We have lots and lots of ships and soldiers. So we shouldn't just attack in one place, we should attack in several places. So the British decided, well, one of the places we should go is down into the south, because we expect the loyalists down there would help us. I'm going to just point out one thing. Tory is a political party, like Democrats and Republicans. There were two political parties in Britain. The Tory Party, capital T-O-R-Y, the members known as Tories, they sided with the British. Whigs, capital W-H-I-G-S, capital W-H-I-G-S, the Whigs sided with the colonists. Okay, so even back in England, there were people that said, yeah, you push these guys' rights, they should be fighting you. So the Tory party, that's pro-government, pro-English. The Whig party is pro-patriot, pro-rebellion. The British decided, let's have 3 expeditions go. 3 expeditions, all at the same time, or pretty close to it. First one they sent up to Quebec. Quebec, a city up in Canada, they set it up there for a reason. All right, everybody look up here for just a second, then I'll give you a minute to write. Incidentally, guys at home, if you're watching this on a video and you want to stop and write something down, just stop it for a minute if you haven't figured that one out yet. All right, this is the city of Quebec. I drew a red line around it because that means that's British. There are British inside the city of Quebec. They own it. It's their town. This check line, which is in dark blue, those are Americans. The Americans, under a general named Benedict Arnold, who you might know as a famous traitor. He became the most famous traitor in American history. He went over to the British later on. But early in the war, he was one of our better generals. He was very good. And Benedict Arnold had come up to Quebec, and he had surrounded Quebec. It's called laying siege. Siege means one army surrounds another and won't let them get supplies. So the Americans had a siege around Quebec. And then the British came in with a new force, the first of these 3 expeditions, and they surrounded the Americans, or nearly surrounded the Americans, who were surrounding the other British. And Benedict Arnold said, we can't wait till we're surrounded or we'll have British in front of us and behind us. We have to get out of here. So the Americans retreated back down into the colonies. So it was held by the British, surrounded by the Americans. It was besieged by the Americans. And when the other British who arrived with this first expedition began to surround the Americans, then the Americans retreated, went back down to the colonies. So the first of the expeditions was a British victory. This is the dance section for all the people at home. You should all be getting up, get up. Yeah, get into it. Okay. Ready, James? All right, James is ready. He's fired up. He's excited. All right. Yeah, Charleston. All right, so we had one expedition go way up here to Quebec. The second expedition came way down here to Charleston, South Carolina. The Americans got word that this British force was coming. So the Americans thought, well, if we're going to save our city, we better build a fort. So they built a little fort. Actually, it wasn't named Fort Moultrie then. The commander's name was Moultrie back then. But it's been called Fort Moultrie ever since. It still is today, so I'm just going to call it Fort Moultrie. They built Fort Moultrie out of the local wood, which is a palmetto tree. This is a palmetto tree. It looks just exactly like a palm tree, except these things point up instead of pointing down. That's like the difference between a palm and a palmetto. So these are palmetto trees. Palmetto wood is extremely wet. Kind of hard to work with, but still, they built a fort, they constructed the walls, they filled it in with dirt, and they put more dirt in front of it. They were ready for the British Navy to come in. And the British Navy came sailing in. I'll leave you guys right for a second. Okay. Annalise is writing a letter home. Dear Mom, get me out of here. might just stop there for a second, Chloe. I'll let you get a little more rain.
We're back.
All righty. Boy, looks like Mr. Holman just magically jumped across the room. In Charleston, they had built the fort out of palmetto logs. And the British Navy came sailing in. Now, the way navies worked back then, and this is just a copy of the Mayflower, it's not really a warship, but it gives you the idea of a sailing ship. The way they worked back then was there were gun ports in the ship, and they would simply push a cannon out, not all the way out, but they push it out far enough that it could pretty much shoot only straight sideways. They could do a little bit with up and down, and a little bit with sideways. For the most part, what had to happen was the ship had to sail right facing on its side the target. Ordinarily at sea, they would pull away and then come back when they were ready to fire again. So two lines of ships, two navies fighting each other, it would look like this. They just keep coming back to shoot each other. But in a port like Charleston, if Riley were the target, Riley is Fort Moultrie, then the ship would come in, it would fire, and they would make a circle of ships. It would sail over, the next ship would fire, and the next ship, and the next ship, and the next ship, and the next ship until it came back here. So they'd circle the ships around, always pretty much constantly attacking the fort. So they came in to get Fort Moultrie. And here they did it, they shot. You know, the British commander, all full of glee, thought he was going to destroy this. Oh, they've constructed a fort. Lovely. Let's blow it up. Fire! And so they shot. Boom, 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 boom. And these are the best gunners in the world and the best Navy in the world. And there were the walls of the fort. And when they were done, he said, ceasefire! And when he did, the walls of the fort looked just exactly the same. Well, we kind of missed. Fire! Boom, 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 boom. Ceasefire! And the walls of the fort looked exactly the same. Fire! Boom, 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 boom. Ceasefire! And the walls of the fort looked just the same. And so the British sailed away. They couldn't destroy the fort. What happened was, and again, here's God with his little finger in our history, palmetto wood is about the most wet wood that there is. If one of you little tiny people were to cut a plug out of a palmetto tree and put it on the sidewalk, and even with your little weight, step on it and crush it and move it, there'd be moisture on the sidewalk. That's how wet the wood is. That makes it very pliable, very bendable. When the British were firing, they were hitting the wall, but it was doing this. And when they stopped shooting it, it went. So they shot it some more and went. They stopped shooting and went. So they couldn't destroy the fort. So they sailed off. I'll tell you another little one, which you don't need to know. It's just kind of interesting. You almost feel sorry for the British. There is, near Charleston, a couple little islands. There's Charleston over here, and then there's a island that comes out. This is Sullivan's Island. There's another little one over here called the Isle of Palms. My map making skill is very weak here. You've been to the Isle of Palms? Okay. Please don't go swimming, I'm going to tell you. I lived in Charleston for years. And every few years, like clockwork, some idiot, usually high schooler, sometimes college kid, gets really, really brave and says, I can do this because I'm an ocean kid. I can swim. What they do is, well, let me first tell you what the British did, then I'll tell you what the kids do. The British said, okay, we couldn't attack Charleston by land or by boat, so let's run over here and we'll attack it by land. We'll unload our army on the Isle of Palms. We'll march across the Isle of Palms. Then there's just a little tiny bit of water right here. We'll have somebody swim across that, with a rope, and then we could hook up some pulleys and we get people across. And then we'll march over with a little more water, and then we'll attack by land. Well, the British unloaded on the Isle of Palms. They marched across to where they could see Sullivan's Island, and they said, send me a couple of fellas who can swim. And the fellas jumped in and they swam about halfway across and they drowned. I said, some people who could swim, send me some swimmers. So they sent a couple more guys over and they swam about halfway across and they drowned. It is not physically possible for a human being to swim across this little body of water. Michael Phelps would drown in the middle of this body of water. It is a freakish thing. What it is, this is why the high schoolers and the college kids drown. University of South Carolina, some years ago, said, oh, we want to figure out what's going on here. So they took a camera, an underwater camera, because so many people had drowned there, and they lowered it down, and just a couple of inches under the water, they saw this really hard current. Okay. Then they went down a few more inches, and there was another really hard current going a different way. They went down a few more inches, and there was another really hard current coming a third way, and a fourth, and a fifth, and a sixth. I believe there's 9 currents there, which means the water's going in 9 different directions. If you stick your hand in, when your hand's here, you're pulling yourself in one direction. When it's here, you're pulling yourself in 2 directions. When it's here, you're pulling yourself in 3 directions. When you do a whole stroke, you're pulling yourself in 9 directions, which means you're not going anywhere. Michael Phelps would stand here and do this all day long until he became exhausted and drowned. No one can swim across it. It is not physically possible. So the poor British, they try to get across so they could attack Charleston, and it doesn't work. So they just give up and say, okay, this place is too freaky. You can't break the fort. You can't swim in the water. And they went back up north. So the second expedition was an American victory. Yes. Yes, you. What's called what? That's the big one. That's just Mike. That's just where the city of Charleston is. Then the bigger island is Sullivan's Island. The smaller one is the Isle of Palms. What's the water called? That's just the bay between, or just that's some water between the Isle of Palms and Sullivan's Island. I don't think it has a name. Maybe kids have named it something cool like Death Beach by now. They just named it Death Water. Could be. Yes. It's not asking me this one, but if we wrote an example of land, could it be like water? Water and natural resources are included in land. So, say you were you accidentally fell into the water and you were on a floaty, could you not get it back onto the floaty? If you could reach your floaty, if your floaty went out of reach of you, you're dead. What? I mean, you could float there and just kind of stay there until somebody throws you a rope and they could pull you over that way. Okay. All right. Luckily, Gus would pull the cord and inflate his rubber duck. Yes. So the current, if the current's strong enough, could it like move you? It's not that strong. No, but if it was strong enough. We moved from Murder Beach to Terror Beach. Yes. Would it be like a what? They're swimming in their what? Swimming in their jacuzzi. Would it be like a jacuzzi? Well, a terror jacuzzi. All right, here we go. Then the campaign for New York begins. They met in London, the British did, and they said, I say, how would we make this incredibly confusing for American children some centuries hence? And somebody said, I know. We have General Howe. Let's send over his brother, Admiral Sir Richard Howe. So you can have General Sir William Howe and Admiral Sir Richard Howe. Oh, that should confuse them completely. Which it might, your 7th graders, I'm not going to bother with that. I'm just going to tell you, General Howe's brother was over in charge of the Navy, Admiral Howe, and that's probably about the last time I'll mention it. Okay, here we go. I need to throw a better map of New York in there. They decided, the British decided, what's our best weapon? Again, they're analyzing. How can we do our best to fight this war? How can we win this thing? They said, well, our best weapon, our best part of the military is our Navy. So the more we can be on the water, the better it is for us. And I'm sorry, I should have a better picture of this in there, but if you look at New York, a ship could go up the Hudson River in New York and travel almost all the way up to the little lake, Lake George, then Lake Champlain, all the way to Canada. This is water almost all the way from north to south, this part of New York. And the British said, wow, this is good. This is good. We'll put our ships over there. We will put like a blockade. We will stop the Patriots, cut these guys off, because this is where all the hotheads are. And then we'll crush New England first. Then we'll worry about controlling the rest of them. But this is where all these guys that are causing the trouble are. So we'll cut them off by controlling the water. All right, tiny people at home, if you have not sent me your notes, I think there are one or two of you that have not, please do so. I need to see those from the last part of the test for test 4. I don't need to see the stuff you've done yesterday and today. Alrighty, make sure I get that. It was due yesterday. Actually, it was due a little bit before that, but I gave you yesterday. So again, you need to be doing this. Thank you much. Hasta la vista, babies.